So these are going to be the top decks for Legend, and fair warning, the meta is absolutely dominated by aggro and fast combo decks like this one, Naga Priest. It is the best deck in the game statistically because it is able to reactivate Serpent Wig over and over and over again to get a really wide board of moderately tall minions or a small board of really tall minions, tall being high stats, wide being lots of minions. So the idea of this deck is pretty simple, and there's also a Blessed Priest deck that is very similar, so I'll put them into the same basic category. You want to try to get an early Naga or two out to reactivate the Serpent Wig, and then eventually you want to have the Priestess, Radiant Elemental, play as many cheap spells as you can, play Priestess, reactivate everything, and then play a Boon of the Ascended on your biggest minion. It's pretty simple. Turn 6-ish is when this deck really goes off, maybe 5 if you have the coin, and after you play all that stuff, if your opponent doesn't have immediate removal that next turn, you literally win the game. So the next deck on the list is going to be Enrage Warrior, which went from an absolute garbage deck to actually becoming the second highest win rate deck in the game, and it's mostly with the addition of one card, kind of two. The first one is the kind of card, and that is Weapons Expert. It did make the deck better and allowed you to more consistently draw the Imbued Axe, but the power really came when you got the Animated Berserker, because not only did it give you a more reliable turn 1 play, because that's where this deck struggled, getting a 1-drop out there that you could potentially snowball off of, but it also gives you a potential way to damage your future minions more consistently, so you're always going to get value out of the Imbued Axe. Before, you'd need to have Sanguine Depths or the Cruel Taskmaster, and that would only damage 1. This is a 1-drop with premium stats, and it'll do it to every minion you play. The next deck on the list is going to be Curse Imp Warlock, which is very similar to normal Imp Warlock, which is literally right below it on the tier list, so we're going to combine them a little bit. Their early game runs very similarly. You want to try to use the Imp package to snowball early, maybe get a big minion or two off of Vile Library and the Librarian, draw a bunch of cards with Impending Catastrophe, 2 mana, draw 5, pretty balanced, but overall they start to differ around the mid game, where the Imp block tries to use pumps, right? They try to use the Shady Bartender so that way you can pump up your demons on board and finish off your opponent with Denathrius. This deck, which is slightly better, uses the curse package to try to destroy your opponent over the top, because sometimes if you're playing against something that has a lot of removal, the only way you can destroy them is with curses. Next on the list is going to be Beast Hunter. This deck is just strong at every stage of the game. It really has no weaknesses. If you look at the curve, it's got a lot of 1, 2, 3s, a couple of 4s, 5s, and then you hit late game, and all of a sudden you also have a ton of really good late game cards. You can run Beastalker Tavish, or you can run Rexar, either or. In fact, you could probably run both if you wanted to. I just think that running either or is better, because you don't want them to overlap too much. I just feel like playing the second one is such a waste of a play if you already have a hero card out. So it comes down to personal preference, especially considering everybody got Rexar for free for the event. But yeah, this deck really has no weaknesses. It's got really good early game, mid game, and insane late game with a lot of big late game bombs. Honestly, if you just want a very simple, straightforward tempo deck to play, this is yours. The next deck on the list is going to be Aggro Demon Hunter, which is a deck I'm surprised took this long to start becoming good. I mean, honestly, the Sightless Magistrate, as soon as that came out, I was like, okay, so this deck is going to become at least tier 2, basically overnight. And then it didn't. And then the new event came out, and the meta slowed down, became a little bit greedier, and all of a sudden, that was the perfect storm for this deck to start doing really well. Not only does this deck have insanely good draw now with the Magnifying Glaive and the Sightless Magistrate, but it has extremely efficient damage and cards as well. The Bibliomite at 2 mana 5/4 that you shuffle a card back into your deck, which synergizes with your 2 main draw engines, insane. A 0 mana deal 3 damage that also again synergizes with your main draw engine, insane. The amount of damage this deck can do turns 4, 5, 6, and sometimes 7 can be absolutely unbeatable, especially if you play multi-strike, because then Taunt won't even protect you. Overall, this deck is really good. I'd say it's probably one of the harder aggro decks because you do need to manage your hand size a little bit, but other than that, it's just really good. Next is going to be probably the best budget deck out there. It is just a pure board-based aggro deck. You want to basically flood the board as much as you can early on, pump them with Pride's Fury, Herald of Nature, as well as Mark of the Wild and Sow the Soil, and basically whatever you can get off of Planted Evidence, but this is all predicated on you getting a good early game board. If you play against a deck with a lot of good early game, mid game removal, you can kind of fall apart, but most decks just can't deal with taking almost lethal amounts of damage turn 4 or 5. And not to mention the fact that this deck in its entirety is less than a singular legendary, this is the best budget option in my opinion. Next is going to be Fel Demon Hunter. This is when we're going away from pure aggro and going more towards the greed section. And Fel Demon Hunter is just basically the best version of Relic Demon Hunter. It revolves around late game Jace, maybe double activating it with Bran if you can reduce the cost of one of them with, you know, Sigil of Alacrity or Relic of Dimensions. But the idea of the deck is pretty simple. You want to try to reduce the cost of one of your big late game cards, have a really big spike somewhere between turns 6 and 10, and you're able to also have good early pressure with a lot of cheap Fel spells to keep you alive, and then all of a sudden you play Jace, double activate it or whatever, finish off your opponent with about 14 damage they probably can't deal with. Not to mention the fact that, again, you're able to play these relics and generate giant minions, sometimes discovering more of these minions off of Venomous Scorpid as well as School Teacher. This deck can just get really out of control really fast. Next is Control Paladin, and you might be wondering, if there are so many aggro decks in the meta right now, where are the control decks? Well, this is probably the best one. A good mix of a lot of healing, or at least a decent amount of healing, along with insane removal with Doomsayer, along with Equality, with Wild Pyromancer, Talented Arcanist with City Tax, not to mention a Consecrate and a spammy Arcanist. And then once you get late game, you've got Reno, and half damage off of Lightforged Cariel, insane healing off of Denathrius. Like, at every stage of the game, this is able to beat aggro decks unless you just get unlucky and draw no removal whatsoever. You then have a really solid late game with, again, the Jailer side of Denathrius, Rag for just infinite healing, and Reno. And if you want, I would honestly maybe recommend even throwing in one Shieldblade Champion, a Charged Lifesteal card, so that way you have a little bit of extra burst at the end of the game. You can maybe take out a Consecrate for it if you think you have enough removal already. Really, it's up to you, but it is a really solid extra win condition. Maybe take out a Great Hall for it, up to you. But yeah, it's pretty cool. This deck is probably the best control deck out there. Next is Miracle Rogue. This is my favorite deck to play right now. You have to just play so many things in such a short amount of time, and the next thing you know, you have a pretty cool board of several giant stealth minions, a giant weapon. You got like 4 cards left in your deck by turn. I want to say 6 or 7. It's so much fun when you actually get it to go off. The only issue is it is very hit or miss. Sometimes you just won't draw well and it'll feel helpless. Sometimes you will play against a Resurrect Viper and you will feel helpless. But most of the time, people can't deal with 2 9/9 stealth minions turn 4 or 5, as well as a giant weapon the following turn. This is a really fun deck to play, pretty high skill cap, but if you like miracle decks, this is an awesome deck for you. Now we're getting into the honorable mentions of the deck. These are 2 that are basically tied for 10th place in my opinion, and it's going to be OTK Phylactery Warlock. This deck is a lot better than I thought it was going to be. Not only does it have pretty solid removal with Talented Arcanist and Defile, which basically does 3 damage, and then 3 damage if it killed anything, and then 3 more damage if it killed anything, and it can destroy almost any board. You also have good early removal with Touch, Drain Soul, again, Defile, Explosive Sheep, Grimmer of Sacrifice. You have mana reduction with the Ruin Mithril Rod, and you can sometimes OTK your opponent as early as turn 7 or 8 if you get a really good hand. Not to mention, you also have Dreadlich Tamsin, which allows you to generate a board of 3/3 imps potentially, as well as start drawing cards without taking any damage. Basically, this deck just surprised me, and I think it deserves to be on here, and if you like OTK decks, this is a great option. And last but not least is going to be Mage, which is in a really weird spot right now because I feel like every single deck is decent, if not good, but none of them are standout really good, in my opinion. The one that's closest is probably Ping Mage, because you're able to combo off, get a ton of Wildfires, as well as Magister and Mordresh more consistently and faster than a lot of the other Mage decks out there. You got solid freeze and survivability with Flurry, as well as Frostweave Dungeoneer, solid Alibi, Cold Case, and the Location. Not to mention Shattering Blast, which is great for just straight destroying a couple of big minions that you might not otherwise be able to deal with. But overall, this deck just snowballs up really fast, especially if you can draw Magister Dawngrasp. Has solid draw with Arcane Intellect and Multicaster. And overall, it's the best Mage deck in the game, so if you want to play Mage, this is the deck for you. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, feel free to like, comment, subscribe. Sorry this one was so long and we had 10 decks. It's just there were a lot of different decks that have had a like 53 or better % win rate recently. And I decided to tell you every single one of them, even though most of them were aggro.